Welcome back to A Little Bit of Cheese, your daily bite-sized Wisconsin sports podcast. I'm your host, Cody Depius. I want to thank you for being here with us once again today. This is Packers-Badgers Friday. It's exciting, and we're about to get into it. So, got a couple of keys for the Packers game here. It'll be a noon game on Sunday at Lambeau. The weather is not looking to be very optimal. I would say it's going to start to actually look like fall weather, which, I mean, we're halfway through October almost here. You kind of expected this. It was going to start to happen. There's a possibility of rain, so that could definitely affect this game, but a high of 55 degrees expected for Lambeau Field on Sunday. That could definitely play into the effect of the game, and I think it'll possibly play into a couple of keys that I have here. But key number one, and this is what you've seen over the course of the year and the progression that Jeff Hafley has used for this defensive unit, is optimizing your secondary. With, of course, Jair Alexander being out, Carrington Valentine being out, they've kind of had to mix and match and figure out how that they can try to defend the pass. Last week, Eric Stokes, I know I said on Monday that he's kind of coming into his own. I went back, I watched some stuff. He actually struggled quite a bit last week. He allowed a 122 passer rating against, which is not good, which Eric Stokes is not expected to be a number one corner on this defense. That's what was expected of him last week. And no, LA didn't really have a number one wide receiver, but you expect a little bit more out of Stokes. So moving forward, you hope once that things get healthy, Stokes can kind of come into his own, as I think he's going to expect it to be a cornerback 3 at this point. I think Valentine has shown a lot to this defense, the defensive coaches and the personnel coaches, where I think Carrington Valentine is going to be the second best cornerback in this unit, and then, of course, Jair would go back into number 1, which Jair, I think, has played very well when he's been healthy this year. He is a force at that cornerback 1 spot. But optimizing the defensive secondary, where it came into play, was Evan Williams playing safety last week, and then Javon Bullard moving down to slot corner. And Bullard hasn't done this since 2022 at Georgia, but it worked out very well. He runs downhill, he hits hard, he's a very good tackler. And Evan Williams played exceptionally at safety. There are a lot of people, you can go look at a bunch of different NFL analysts. There's a couple of TikTok analysts as well that have kind of pointed it out. But Evan Williams is a very good NFL safety right now. He stepped in, and we saw him play very well over the preseason games, but you saw it really for the first time on the NFL regular season stage last week. He had a very good game against the LA Rams. So if you can keep Williams at safety alongside Xavier McKinney as the two safeties, and then putting Javon Bullard down in the slot or keep him at nickel, then you don't have to use Keyshawn Nixon all that much. And I've kind of had my opinion out here on this, where I don't think Keyshawn Nixon is a good NFL cornerback, and that's okay. He does a lot of things for special teams. He's been a very valuable player for Green Bay the last couple of seasons. He wasn't brought in with the expectation that he was going to have to play a lot on defense, but he had to last year. He actually had a couple of big plays that he made in some big games. I know he had that game-winning interception against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. He had a couple other plays last year as well, but you have enough talent in the secondary this year. You shouldn't have to use Keyshawn Nixon, and especially if Jair Alexander can be healthy and come back, as well as Valentine, which as of right now, it looks like that is expected. They've been limited in practice, but there is a good possibility last week that Jair would have played, but I think something came up on Sunday morning. He didn't feel 100%, and he didn't want to go out there. So there's a much better chance, even going into this week, that Jair Alexander is going to be that top cornerback on Green Bay's defense. So that is key number 1, is optimizing the defense, whatever personnel is out there in the secondary. Of course, he said Devontae Wyatt, he's not going to be there. He was in a boot recently. He's not going to be ready on the defensive line. But that brings me to key number 2, and that is going to be keeping Kyler Murray on the inside, keeping him in check, forcing him to throw. Do not allow a quarterback with the running ability of Kyler Murray to get outside the pocket. That's where Green Bay has historically stunk. I always go back and I think to the Colin Kaepernick game, where they allowed almost 200 yards rushing to a quarterback in a playoff game because they let him get outside. they were not prepared at all. The Dom Capers defense, I suppose that was probably 11 years ago now already, but that Dom Capers defense was not ready for a Colin Kaepernick and the running ability that he had if he was able to get outside of the tackles. Kyler Murray is a very good runner. If you've watched any of his highlights, he looks like you're playing Madden. Like you have the super fast quarterback that bounces all around inside the pocket, can go outside the pocket, and then goes super quick down the field and get 12 yards like it's nothing. And he could eat up the Green Bay defense if he's able to get outside like that. Now, Green Bay, they've faced a couple of mobile quarterbacks this year. You had your Will Levis, you had your Jalen Hurts, you had Anthony Richardson, but this is a different runner. Those guys are more of the tough running quarterbacks are on third down. They might actually lower their shoulder and knock over somebody. But Kyler Murray, when it's first down, second down, third down, at any point, he could take off and he could really hurt the defense. So a lot of this pressure is going to be put on the edge guys for the Packers defense. That's going to be your Rashawn Gary. That's going to be your Lucas Van Ness. That's going to be Kingsley Enagbare, which those guys, aside from Rashawn Gary, have made a few plays this year. But those are the guys that are going to need to step up and flush everything inside. If you can keep Murray inside the pocket, especially if your secondary is optimized, as we stated in point number 1, the defense could have a very good day against this Arizona offense. And this is not a Cardinals team that's going to give you an easy win. They just came off of a victory over San Francisco, which you saw San Francisco looked like the 49ers once again last night with a pretty solid win over the Seattle Seahawks. And the Cardinals also were right there in a game against Detroit, who I think at this point is one of the best teams in the NFC, if not the best. Or the whole Vikings conversation, that's a whole other thing. They're undefeated, but I don't think they're going to hold up with that. But Arizona has hung in there with some of the best teams in the NFC, and I would not be surprised if this is kind of a trap for Green Bay. They can't go into this game expecting like they're just going to steamroll them, even if it is at Lambeau, even if the weather might not be great. Yeah, Arizona, they play in a warmer climate. They play in a dome. But they could come into Lambeau, and if you let Murray get outside and get a couple of big plays on you, that it's possible Arizona could come in and win this game. Absolutely. You see a 5-point favorite for Green Bay, but don't go in with the expectation that this is going to be an easy game. 5 points is still just one score, and that's the betting lines. And if you know any Vegas betting lines, if the NFL team is playing at home, they're usually going to get a 3-point bump when it comes to the spread. So really, Green Bay is only expected to win by 2 or 3 points, which is not a whole lot, which is normally the case in the NFL, but it could be an interesting game. Green Bay's 3-2. They're fighting to look like one of the better teams in the NFC in the standings. They got to try to keep up with Minnesota. Chicago's now playing very well. Detroit is going to be right up there. But Arizona, they played some really tough games so far this year. They already stole one from San Francisco, and they could fight right back to 500 with a win over Green Bay. So they're going to be playing very tough, and this is going to be an interesting game. You're really going to have to rely on your defense once again to keep these games in check. But once again, now we can expect to actually rely a little bit on the defense, where the past 2-3 years you weren't able to. But I think Hafley's smart enough. He showed last week that he's able to move the personnel around enough to optimize that defense. So I do have confidence. But just saying, the expectations we can keep very, very medial. I think this is going to be a very fun game. And that brings us to our last point here, point number 3, as to how the Packers can win on Sunday. Can Jordan Love find consistency? This might be a little bit more difficult for him to find consistency if the weather is not optimal for the passing game. If it's 55 degrees, if there's a little bit of rain, if there's some wind going around, it's not going to feel great, which then you could rely on a Josh Jacobs, who has run well this year, but you're looking for another big game from him at some point. But I think the big key here, and it'll be more towards the long-term success for this Green Bay team, is if Love can just stand in the pocket and make those easy throws. He made some really nice throws last week. We talked about the deep one to Jaden Reed, but even the swing passes, the short stuff over the middle, some of those passes have been off. There's been a lot of stuff thrown low at guys' knees, and you're making your receivers go out there and actually have to put a little bit of effort into catching the ball where it should be right on them where they can turn upfield and they can go. I want to see more of those easy throws be made with less effort for Jordan Love. And I think the knee has had a lot to do with it. I don't think he's been able to plant as much on his lead leg. So hopefully it is healed up enough where he feels comfortable enough to plant on it and that he can just sit in there, sling it, make good throws. I want to see him start to cut down on the interceptions. Last week we talked about the pick six. It was really ugly. Was it his fault? A good chunk. It wasn't all of his fault, but I do want to see in some capacities interceptions get cut down. You've seen some boneheaded plays out of Love since he's come back. He's the big man. He's the big money man. He's supposed to play like he's the big money man. Now he starts to cut down on those mistakes, and you got to get on a roll here. You are the Packers quarterback. You are the captain of this team, and you got a little bit of turmoil right now in your wide receiver room. Of course, with all the Romeo Doubs drama that had been going on. Christian Watson, we'll see if he can be back. Dontavian Wicks, he's been dropping some passes downfield. Can those guys step up? Can you corral them? And can you do your job and make the easy throws like you're expected to? Put them on the chest. Don't make your receivers have to go down to try to catch a ball that should be a really easily thrown ball. Want to see the consistency. If they can do that, I think those three keys, those will be the biggest ones going into Sunday. I do predict that Green Bay will win this game, but I do think things will be interesting. I think it'll come down to the wire. And it's all going to come down to, can they execute what I've talked about? And really, consistency, it's a big key. There's a lot to ask. It takes an entire game to have consistency. But with Jordan Love, you saw a good 9 to 10 weeks of consistency last year. Of course, you had an off season. You had an interesting game in Brazil. You had a knee injury where a lot of people were scared for you. You sat out for 2 weeks. You came back. You got down big against Minnesota, then looked really good. And then last week you had a boneheaded interception and then went on a run where you had 9 straight completions. Now let's just see the good continue to stay good and just limit the bad. And I expect at some point he's going to do that, but it's at what point this season does he actually turn that corner and start to really have that consistency. We'll move on to the Badgers as well. They take on Rutgers tomorrow, Saturday at 11 a.m. Rutgers, they got a pretty good defense. This will be a tall task for Phil Longo on the offense, as the Scarlet Knights have only allowed 15.8 points per game. That is ranking top 20th nationally, where Phil Longo's offense, his tenure so far at Wisconsin, has not shown that it can play well against a good defense. Can that offense continue to move? And I understand that they're banged up. They're going to be banged up for probably the rest of the season. You're without your starting quarterback. You're without your starting running back. You do get Will Pauling back now, who is your best wide receiver. But can these secondary guys step up? Tawe Walker, he's got a 4.2 yards per carry as the running back for Wisconsin. I'd like to see that increased a little bit. He did play pretty well last week. And then Braden Locke, he started out shaky against Purdue, had the 2 interceptions, but then looked really good. Can they keep this momentum going? And I would just love for this Longo offense to show that it is competent. We have not seen it yet as Badgers fans. This is a big test. If they win, they could go up to 4-2 and look formidable. They can start to build a little bit of a resume when it gets down to the end towards bowl season. This Scarlet Knight team, they're 4-1 so far this year. Yeah, they're coming off a tough loss against a good Nebraska team, but you're going into Rutgers. This would be a very big win. Or if it's a loss, you're down to 500 and you're back to square one, trying to figure things out. How do you fix everything? I'm expecting for this to be a low-scoring game, and you just need to limit your mistakes. Braden Locke, you can't be throwing those interceptions like you did against Purdue and then previously against Alabama. You can't make those mistakes as the Badgers quarterback because they will come back to bite you. You need to be able to make a couple of stops where Rutgers, they don't have an explosive offense, but they have a very good run game. I don't want to botch this name, but their running back, his name is Kyle Monangai. He has 667 yards so far this season, a 5.8 yards per carry average, and 6 touchdowns. That's a very good running back and a very good running Big Ten. If you're able to bottle him up, that's big. It could help you with time of possession, just getting the ball back in your quarterback's hands would be huge. So you have to focus on the run first, and you want your offense to start to find a little bit of consistency. Can Longo's boys go out there and play solid against a good team? We haven't seen it yet, but they're going to have an opportunity to this weekend. So the slate for this weekend, once again, Badgers playing on Saturday. Badgers playing on Saturday at Rutgers, 11 a.m. kickoff. And then the Packers will be on Sunday, a noon kickoff. Arizona Cardinals at Lambeau. So we got some two games that should be pretty solid. They should be tight. I'll be watching them this weekend, and we'll get all the coverage back for you on Monday. Hopefully Sam can join us for that, but we'll be back with all the coverage. We'll summarize everything, and we'll get you set up for next week when we get to it. So I hope you guys all have a good weekend. I want to thank you for listening with us today on Friday. I'm Cody Depius, your host, so we'll see you once again on Monday for another edition of A Little Bit of Cheese, your daily bite-sized Wisconsin sports podcast.